Gigabyte hasn't learned a thing from its peers about how to respond to technical media reporting on anything that's critical. We know what happened the last time a company doubled down instead of immediately fixing the fire hazard. And Gigabyte, right now, everyone knows NZXT is over there going, thank God for Gigabyte. There it is. Now, in case you're just tuning in and you're wondering why is Gigabyte right now standing 5 foot deep in a hole holding a shovel right next to another hole with a stone that says MSI on it, we'll give you a brief recap. And one of those killed an RTX 3080, or well, it probably did. It could have been the video card, but that's also made by Gigabyte, so it doesn't really matter. They killed a part either way. That's pretty much it. That sums it up. We'll link the original video in the description below. You should definitely get caught up on it if you're not. It's a somewhat fascinating exploration into why some of Gigabyte's power supplies are exploding right now. But what we're focusing on here today is Gigabyte's press release that was in response to our testing. They really got a lot of details wrong. It makes us a little concerned about their ability to design a power supply. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermaltake and the Thermaltake ToughRAM XG memory. Thermaltake's ToughRAM XG series is a freshly updated line of RGB memory, available in frequencies ranging from 3600 MHz up to 4600 MHz. Thermaltake's ToughRAM XG uses 10-layer PCBs and heat spreaders affixed with bright LEDs everywhere, and they market toward overclocking support and capabilities. Learn more at the links in the description below. So as we stated in part one, this issue, the issue is the Gigabyte GP-P850GM and the GP-P750GM, and as far as we're aware right now, only these two units. If you have another one and you're concerned about it and it doesn't match those numbers, then we don't know of a reason it would also be exploding, but that doesn't mean it won't, because Gigabyte has not given us any confidence in any of its products with its response and how it handled this. But the issue is that about half of Newegg's reviews, before we did anything with this, so it's before we had influence on it, about half of Newegg's user reviews were showing DOA or dysfunctional power supply or dead power supply, and some of them even included notes about killing other components, taking them out with the power supply in the process of dying. We explored that. We explored one aspect of it, but from what we can tell from the user reviews, there are many aspects in which these power supplies are either dangerous to your components or are explosive, which is potentially dangerous to you. Right now, if we're honest, frankly, the GPUs rank pretty high up in that list. Not sure where the individual is, given the value of a GPU today and how Gigabyte apparently values its user base, but they're both up there pretty high. Before we really get rolling here, it's okay for companies to make bad products. Happens all the time. Really easy to do. There's a lot of links in the supplier chain. We can totally understand making a bad product. And it's how the company deals with it that matters. So if they do a recall without being forced to do it, if it's potentially dangerous, then that's a good move. If they offer replacements, if they get ahead of the problem as soon as they become aware of it and say, we screwed up, we're gonna do the right thing and help you out, that's fine. That's the part that matters. It's hard to make good products. And with one as complicated as this, we can understand why it would be hard to make a good product. But to double down on it, especially when it explodes, or in the case of some others we've tested, catches fire, that's getting irresponsible. So that's where we draw the line. We don't hold a grudge with a company if it fixes the problem correctly without us pushing it off a cliff in order to do it. Just want to make that really clear as we get into this, because we were trying to work with Gigabyte here privately for months, and never did Gigabyte say, you know what, maybe we screwed up. Let's look into this. That's all they needed to do. That's not what they did. Reminder, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to support our testing with this. This took us several months the first time, and it looks like it's going to take us even longer. You can grab a mouse mat, mod mat, bar runner with pint glass, or other items. Helps us out, and you get something good quality in return. Hardware Busters had reported to Gigabyte this issue back in October of 2020, and as we said in our video, we collaborated with Aris from Hardware Busters to work on this further. So they're just now responding, but let's see what Gigabyte had to say and go through this together. Gigabyte starts off by saying, quote, Gigabyte is aware of certain media outfits casting doubt over the quality of the power supply models GP-P850GM and GP-P750GM. Do tell, Gigabyte. Who is it? Who's the certain media outfits? Is it me? Are you afraid to say my name? So Gigabyte takes pride in the design and quality of our products, they say, and as such, Gigabyte says, it takes reports of this matter extremely seriously and therefore would like to address the reported potential issues as follows. Couple of things here. So let's talk about how extremely seriously, their words, Gigabyte takes this matter. Gigabyte takes this issue so extremely seriously that when it first received reports of the issue in October 2020, it did nothing. It takes it so extremely seriously that when we started publicly stating we were working on further investigating the issue after people called our attention to it, Gigabyte did nothing. To our knowledge anyway, they didn't really talk to us. We reached out, in fact, and gave them about 5 months notice before our video went up. We contacted them in about March and started talking to them. We sent questions to them in about June. I've got a splinter in my finger from a metal fragment from one of these power supplies right now. That's why I'm kind of distracted. It's bleeding, actually. No, it's actually bleeding. Anyway, that's from one of those exploding. But I'll fix that later. But they had a statement after that email in June that basically answered nothing. It was useless. We showed some of it in our first part of the video. So Gigabyte took this issue so extremely seriously that when Aris from Hardware Busters reported it, they did nothing in an extremely serious fashion. Now, interestingly, Gigabyte's most recent statement conflicts with some of the things that Gigabyte said to us privately in email before. And the fun part about reporting is sometimes you don't give the manufacturer all the information you have. You don't reveal your hand when you're starting to ask them questions about something you already know is faulty. And that leads to situations like this, where Gigabyte statements are in conflict with each other. Oops! The statement continues. It says, quote, "For desktop PC systems, there can occasionally be instances where the peak wattage can exceed the intended usage range. During such instances, the Gigabyte GP-P850GM and 750 model power supplies include the industry-standard built-in safety feature over power protection, or OPP. The OPP safety feature is designed to shut down the unit when the power load exceeds the wattage the unit was designed to operate within." Emphasize one of these. They say, the OPP safety feature is designed to shut down the unit. Gigabyte missed a keyword here. That keyword, safely. The OPP feature is designed to safely shut down the power supply when it exceeds the limit. Let's just say the liquid nitrogen tank I have behind me is in need of off-gassing, of venting, because it's overpressure, and it might explode if it doesn't let the gas out of the tank. Well, if the tank then exploded as a safety mechanism to prevent exploding, did it really help? Or thereabouts, where we talked about how power supply, oh geez, that was a liquid nitrogen pressure release. A preemptive explosion to prevent a future expected explosion. Gigabyte, you're doing it wrong. That's not how you're supposed to do it. Gigabyte says, quote, "The OPP was set to 120% to 150%. By the way, that's way too high. They said that's 1020 watts to 1300 watts for the GP-P850GM and 900 watts to 1125 watts for the GP-P750GM. So a couple of things here. First of all, Gigabyte, when we were talking to the company in email prior to publishing, told us that the OPP range is 825 watts to 925 watts on the 750 watt unit, and on the 850 is 950 watts to 1050 watts for that unit. So now to say that the OPP range is, or was at this point, 1020 to 1300 watts on the 850 watt unit, well, that's adjusting the upper bound by about a 24% increase old to new. That's a pretty big change. In fact, if you look at it, Gigabyte is actually, whether it intends to or not, adjusting its claimed OPP to conveniently match the numbers that we found in our testing. That's interesting, especially because we didn't tell Gigabyte the exact details of the numbers at which we were seeing failures in our testing prior to publishing. Let's talk about the worst part of all this. That's Gigabyte's misleading statements, wherein it repeatedly tries to downplay the issues while also offering a soft recall or return. It's like failure to commit to either one properly. It's about the worst possible response you could have, where you're saying our customers are using it wrong and reviewers are doing it wrong, but also you can have a new one. Really sending weird messages there, Gigabyte. Anyway, let's read what it says. It says, Gigabyte appreciates and takes into consideration any feedback and suggestions from our media partners and PC hardware professionals. Yes, they appreciate it so much that they ignored Aris when he brought it to them about a year ago. Gigabyte says, quote, "We were made aware by third parties," that's us, "of concerns regarding potential issues of the GP-P850GM and GP-P750GM tripping at high wattages when tested via DC electronic load equipment for extended lengths of time." Let's repeat that. For, quote, "extended lengths of time," quote, "repeatedly close to the 120% to 150% OPP trigger point. This level of extended testing could severely reduce the lifespan of the product and the components of this GP, P850, and so forth." Let's get a couple things straight here. Gigabyte is either lying or incompetent, or it doesn't understand anything that's going on, but we'd classify that under incompetent, seeing as it makes this product, and power supplies are a scary thing to make if you don't understand what you're talking about, Gigabyte. So Gigabyte claims we were repeatedly going close to the OPP limit. Let's get something straight here. Actually, we weren't. It was once, each power supply. One time. Sure, you could maybe weasel your way through a arbitration or litigation by saying, well, when we said repeatedly, we meant one time for multiple power supplies, that's repeatedly. Okay, but we just want to make clear for all the viewers out there that in actual fact, we approached OPP once and shipped it once on most of these, and that's when they exploded. And by the way, before Gigabyte successfully takes away the focus of this whole piece, remember that a lot of the Newegg user reviews report either DOA arrival, which we're curious if that's maybe because they tripped OPP in their factory and then shipped it. It's not supposed to explode after OPP trips once, by the way. Don't let Gigabyte gaslight you into thinking that. It's a protection. It's not supposed to just work one time and then kaboom, the whole thing blows up. That wouldn't make any sense. So whatever, either way, a lot of user reviews showing death of components, death of power supplies. Not all those users were tripping OPP, certainly. And so it's potentially a great way to gaslight people away from the core issue, which is don't buy these power supplies. They're bad. There's a problem with them, and it might not just be OPP. Now, additionally, so Gigabyte said we repeatedly approached the OPP trigger point, which is factually incorrect at best. That's the nicest way we can phrase that. Secondly, Gigabyte said extended testing, and they talk later about extended length of time. Also incorrect. Frustrating me, Gigabyte. Most of these units failed in about 2 minutes or less. None of them failed from extended testing. Nothing went longer than 10 minutes before a failure, for sure. Most were about 2. And as a reminder, we did actually have an endurance tested unit in a system that went for about 72 hours, but it was only at 60% load and it never hit OPP. Be really clear about that too. That one never triggered OPP. That's the same as a user taking it from Newegg, putting it in their build, running a game at 60% load on a power supply, completely reasonable, and then having it kill the GPU, or maybe it didn't kill the GPU. Maybe the GPU decided to destroy itself, in which case, again, it's Gigabyte branded, so we're not really losing scope of the story here. It's still a Gigabyte problem. But let's try to move on here. Gigabyte says to address these potential issues raised by third parties, specifically those discovered during their testing via DC electronic load equipment. Notice how they keep saying that to try and make you think that, oh, it's not real world, it's not realistic. It's just power. It's all realistic. Discovered during their testing via electronic load equipment for, again, extended lengths of time, again, repeatedly close to the 120% to 150% OPP trigger point, Gigabyte has made adjustments and lowered the OPP on the power supplies to the below values. So now, Gigabyte is doubling down on its claims that it was extended, that it was repeated, and we believe they are attempting to paint our testing in a bad light. We feel like Gigabyte is now trying to disparage us and lead people to think that our testing was different than it was in a way which would benefit Gigabyte if people held that belief. So Gigabyte, both of those are incorrect statements, and it would be ideal if you would apologize for making those incorrect statements and what we believe is disparaging our operation and our efforts. So after all this deflection and bullshit about how much Gigabyte appreciates third parties, thanks, Gigabyte. Appreciate it. It then states that it's adjusting the OPP trigger point down to 110 to 120%. Interestingly, those numbers now align with the numbers that they gave us previously. Related to this, Aris noted in a response that was sent to Gamers Nexus the following, quote, "The problem is that 110% to 120% OPP is impossible with analog controllers, which use resistors to adjust OPP. These resistors drift with temperature. In other words, their resistance changes according to the operating conditions. So it is impossible to achieve such a small OPP range under both cold and hot conditions. The only way to achieve a tightly set OPP is through digital circuits and MCU." Finally, Gigabyte doesn't mention the operating conditions under which the new OPP settings apply. Speaking of MCUs, we need one that will snap these power supplies out of existence. So that's what Gigabyte had to say. You may remember a hardware news episode last week where we warned everybody that Gigabyte was probably going to start trying to twist this. And that's because we got a heads up from a couple of people within Gigabyte who told us that Gigabyte HQ was allegedly trying to say that things like this is an old issue related to old power supplies, blah, blah, blah. And obviously they had a lot of other things to say too that were of questionable accuracy. So regarding the first point, we bought most of these power supplies in the window of February to May, and we acquired some of them from various points in their life dating back to November, so those would be the older ones, from viewers. But we bought them as recently as May of this year. Not that old. Quote, "Gigabyte highly values the confidence and trust all our customers..." Sorry, that was hard to not laugh at. "The confidence and trust all our customers have in our product quality and after-sale services." Gigabyte, nobody trusts this product. Look at the Newegg reviews. You're insane. Even before our review, they were really unfavorable for you. Quote, "Gigabyte would like to stress the potential issues that were reported only seemed to occur after very long time periods of extreme load testing via DC electronic load equipment and would not be typical of any real-world usage." All right, Gigabyte. It's starting to look like you're lying. That's now 3 times, at least, that Gigabyte has said the same thing, and now they've gone as far as changing it from extended to very long time periods of extreme load testing. You know, Gigabyte, if you want to go to war, we can go to war. Maybe like, let's get the facts right before you start pushing this stuff through press releases about how we tested things and trying to paint us, from what we believe, paint us in a light which is perhaps beneficial to you and perhaps makes our testing look less reasonable than it is. Let's just get that out of the way right now. All right, so Gigabyte continues on to say, Gigabyte GP-P850GM and GP-P750GM power supplies included industry standard protection designs, OCP, OTP, OVP, OPP, UVP, and SCP. Safety certification from various countries to ensure safe and stable operation of your system. Gigabyte then lists a bunch of logos in its new brand of alphabet soup called No, Please Trust Us. First of all, from what we understand, these certifications do not necessarily include validation of those protections. Secondly, at least CE is self-declared and is therefore not special. It doesn't really mean anything for you. Neither does, by the way, 80 plus gold. It doesn't, that has to do with efficiency and doesn't have to do with the power supplies exploding. So finally, if you remember our video, we noticed parts changing internally in the power supplies, and that included primary PWM switchers. So contrary to popular belief, from what people have dealt with in the electronics industry, it is not common for this type of part, it's not common practice for them to change like this, especially not in an expensive higher tier product like this one. So in theory, Gigabyte should be resubmitting those units to get some of the same certifications that it just listed in its spam of agencies that it's trying to hide behind to somehow claim a level of authority over its power supplies. They should probably be resubmitting those, but we'd have to look into it more closely, and certainly we are capable of doing that. Next, Gigabyte said, quote, "To offer customers complete peace of mind, any serial number not listed in Appendix 1 are the amended OPP settings as listed in point 3. Despite the fact that both before and after OPP adjustment versions are reliable for real-world usage, we still offer owners of the P850GM or P750GM products included in the serial number range listed in Appendix 1 can apply for the 850 and 750 return and exchange service. The writing got a little rough there at the end where Gigabyte's actually offering something instead of, again, what we believe is attacking its media partners who have explored this issue and given them notice for many months prior to publication. So Gigabyte gives the serial number range. I'm not going to read these out on camera, but we'll put them on the screen. And they're saying that those have a free return and exchange service after all the stuff where they said it's not realistic, you're doing it wrong about its users, you're doing it wrong about its reviewers, and it then offers you the option to return and replace it. Really sticking to your guns there, Gigabyte, aren't you? So, couple things here. We have at least one of you who are viewers who emailed us and said you have a unit outside of the serial number range. We would greatly appreciate being able to look at some of those to see sort of what's going on outside of the range, and if Gigabyte has just happened to choose a range for the units we showed on camera with their serial numbers visible. So we'd like to get those. If you can email us, team@gamersnexus.net. Please, only if you have one of these power supplies outside of that range, we will work out getting it from you. We'll pay for the shipping, whatever, we'll figure something out. If you have one that is within that range, right now we have enough of them. We don't need more within that range. And we would encourage you to go ahead and get your replacement from Gigabyte because, frankly, they should have to send them out. We're not sure if the replacement is trustworthy. We'd have to test it. But you should at least try and get it. Even after all this, we're not really convinced that Gigabyte's fixing the problem anyway. Aris said it best when he wrote the following, quote, "This is not just a badly set OPP since many units died under moderate loads and within short periods. I strongly believe that this is just a bad design. The FETs are not driven correctly, and although in quick pre-checks and normal conditions the power supply can be okay, there are cases, not only under stress, where they fail. The timing of FETs is not correct, and this is due to a lousy gate driver or lousy implementation. Of course, I cannot be dead sure without any samples, older and newer generations, in my hands to test and break apart for failure analysis," end quote. And we'll note here as well, Gigabyte did not send Aris additional samples when he originally found this problem. They didn't work with him on it. This is getting into territory where maybe this needs a harder recall. There's several problems with what Gigabyte did here. Ignoring all the ones that we just went through, one other problem with what they're doing here is this is basically what we would call a soft recall. So they've put out this press release. They've said if you have something in this range, you are allowed to send it back and get a replacement. We're sure that process will be tremendously painful and they'll drag you through it. But that's what they're saying. What we'd like to see is some greater attempt to contact the customers and do a more formal recall to pull back units which are potentially dangerous, at least to components, if nothing else. There's no debate here that minimally an exploding power supply in the fashion we've seen them explode can kill components. So that much is not debatable. And we would therefore like to see a more serious and sincere recall, not this joke of one that was pushed out through a press release to try and save face while also doubling down. This is feeling like deja vu with NZXT, where there wasn't much action from NZXT for months. We looked into it. Suddenly there's a little bit of action, but not really an adequate amount. And then we really started digging into it and got serious about it. We reached out to the US CPSC, Consumer Protection Agency, and eventually the NZXT H1 was recalled in several countries around the world to get the riser cable replaced. Gigabyte, you're venturing into those same waters. It's better if you work with us and everyone else, your customers, than if you work against us. So that's it for this one. We will be looking at this more. Give us a little bit of time, but it's not going to take as much this time as last time because them some fighting words. So team@gamersnexus.net, if you have units we can potentially get from you somehow. If you would like to support our reporting and our efforts in the first piece and the continued coverage we're doing, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net and grab any one of our items there. All of it's helpful. Sharing and watching the video is also tremendously helpful. But if you want to grab something from us, get something good in return, and support us, you can grab something like one of the wireframe mouse mats. You can get a mod mat on back order. The Volt especially is in popular demand. You can also grab a bar runner and pint glasses, or any number of shirts, posters, or other items. Thank you very much for the interest and the support. You can also go to patreon.com/gamersnexus for some behind the scenes. We have a brand new behind the scenes video with Patrick Stone talking about the next power supply we're reviewing. Check it out there. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.